What's up guys, back with another DarkBroly video here today. Today I'm going to make a video kind of going over some basic ideas for the upcoming ban list that we have that Bandai has clearly said that we're going to get going into set 14. The ban list was not going to be happening until probably maybe, I think they said maybe 3 weeks before the set actually drops. I think that's what their timeline was, but we're going to be obviously just be doing some speculations because that is fun, it's good content. And we get kind of an idea of what should be banned. So make sure you guys like and subscribe. Guys, comment down below. Let me know what you guys think down below of these card ideas. I picked some leaders. I picked some other cards just so we can go over some stuff, just so we can see. We get kind of a variety of just some possible ban ideas. So the first card we're going to go over is probably the most noticed card, which is going to be MechaFreeza as a leader. In some form or facet, this leader needs to be hit. As someone who plays a lot of MechaFreeza myself, I do think the leader is too strong. I do think the leader is too strong. And you know it's too strong when it forces anyone who is playing that particular color, in this case yellow, to look at their leader and say, yeah, my leader does this, X and Y, but MechaFreeza does it better. And that's a problem. So there are a few different ways that they can look at this outside of just banning the leader, because I don't think Bandai really wants to ban leaders. I think that's a really bad thing for the game, especially when a card like this is a promo card. It just feels really weird to ban stuff. Obviously banning is an option, but we're gonna go over some other options that they could possibly do, mainly some form of erratas to the leader. So one of the big ideas I think they can do is changing the awaken side, the permanent effect. And I have two different permanent effects that there can be. So one is if they limit the extra cards that MechaFreeza can use to one of those particular cards per turn. So what I mean is that your opponent can't play 3 Final Flashes, 4 Final Flashes in one turn, regardless of them using energy or using their leader ability. They can only play one of those particular extra cards per turn. This will limit what MechaFreeza can really do, because now you really can't use a ton of Final Flashes. You can only use 1 Final Flash. Granted, there are other cards that MechaFreeza can use, but the trade-off is I don't think those cards are necessarily as good as Final Flash. This also will limit the amount of U9s you can use on the same turn, forcing your opponent to being able to only using 1 U9 per turn. Definitely does limit the amount of cards that your MechaFreeza opponent will have. The other errata could also be changing its permanent effect to saying can only play mono yellow extra cards that cost 1 for free. What this will do is this will take away the ability to be able to use Universe 9 Assemble for free in cards like Final Spirit Cannon, which does cause a problem for a lot of different decks. Now, does that fully change the leader? Will the leader still not be extremely good? Probably no. People will learn to play around it, including myself, but it is an idea. Another idea could be changing the leader's awaken down to 3, which definitely hinders the deck a lot. You can't use as many awaken effects. Being able to awaken on 5 life by using an extra card and then awakening and then having access to 3 extra energy, basically with using your life, plus you awakening and getting an extra energy, and then the fact you could Bojack or Senzu Bean definitely gives the deck a lot of potential for just, killing anything, obviously, as we've seen. So taking it down to 3 means you have to be at 4 life, activate an extra card, and then flip over. Could change the leader out a little bit. I don't know what Bandai will do. I think Bandai is leaning probably more towards either removing the leader completely, or probably one of the latter effects where they're kind of limiting the amount of extra cards that MechaFreeza can use. Now the second leader that we're going to talk about is going to be DarkBroly, which is another leader that obviously has some similar effectiveness that MechaFreeza does, being able to play stuff out for free. Now, in the case of DarkBroly, it's not playing out extra cards for free, but it's using 30k bodies for free that'll have different effects. Now, there's a big, wide variety now of DarkBrolys that have 30k power that DarkBroly has the effectiveness of. Also, a lot of other cards DarkBroly has the use for now, which is the Gogeta TP, as well as the Draft Box Demigra. These are just two really strong black cards that really make this leader almost untouchable in some senses, unless you're playing against a deck like MechaFreeza. Now, one of the big changes that I think they can do for DarkBroly, and the main one would be limiting the 30Ks down to 1. And this wouldn't necessarily break the deck, but it would definitely add some inconsistencies to the deck, and the deck would be filled with a ton of other cards. So I don't know if that's a route that they would actually go for. The other change, which I think this is more prominent, is making the activate battle on DarkBroly a once per turn, meaning you can only choose one black battle card in your battle area or in your hand and combo with it, and then gain 5k on your leader. I think limiting this to once per turn actually does change the deck out pretty significantly. Forces your opponent not being able to combo out over a bunch of stuff, also not being able to swing with the DarkBroly, combo it off and then replay it if they didn't have it, if they didn't play it that turn already. Limits a lot of different things. Another thing they can do is ban the Ravager, which is the one that rips a card from your opponent's drop area. Mixing that card on turn 1 or 2 with Demigra really does hurt any deck, because you're not really, you're just losing value for, with almost no interaction, because there's no real cards on turn 1 or 2 that you can use that can hit these two cards. God Sealing would be the only one, but chance of you having God Sealing up and running on turn 1 is pretty low, and that's only if you're playing blue, so you really can't use anything else to hit those cards. And the problem is that they can just play Ravager back out even if you remove it, so it's not great. So what can Bandai really do with this leader? They can also limit it to only playing black battle cards, which could limit the fact of the Heartfelt Plea combination, which some people think is really good, some people think it's really bad. You tell me. I think some way DarkBroly needs to be hit in a way that it makes it fair to a lot of other decks, because really, DarkBroly just puts a lot of decks in the dirt. Being able to also just play out 30k bodies for free, it has too much value. So this deck needs to be looked at. Honestly, if this deck ended up getting banned, I can see it being fine. Kills almost that entire set 11 box, since they're, one of the SCRs in that deck is only for this leader, so it just kind of killed the deck. But as again, I don't think they're trying to ban leaders. I think they're going to try to find a way to keep DarkBroly in the meta. But they're definitely going to limit something on DarkBroly to make it a little more fair for people. I definitely do see that happening. Now, the next leader, and the final leader we're going to talk about, is going to be KingPiccolo. KingPiccolo is another deck that has a ton of value, can play a ton of stuff for free, can be very aggro at times, and just pluses off of almost everything that it's doing. So this leader, I don't really know what you could do with this leader. The auto for this card is pretty fair. Even if you negate the attack, being able to grab 3 cards back from their life to their hand, it's pretty good. So I don't think they really need anything to change with that. I think the Awaken's fine. I think one thing they need to do is to limit the Drum card to 1, basically giving it a unique tag on the board. All the other Demon Clan cards are fine, but Drum being a 15k blocker barrier that also negs the card is just extremely powerful. And the fact that it has barrier is just incredibly good. And it's fine. It's okay for cards that have defensive keyword skills. However, the fact that it is not unique makes it very difficult to deal with. You can just play out multiple of those, and your opponent doesn't have a board wipe that gets rid of, that gets your barrier. It gets pretty bad. There's not much you can really do in that case to remove those, and that stalls out a lot of KingPiccolo games because they're just able to block with those drums, either out combo to keep them alive or just keep them on board, and there's not much you can really do about it. So it's definitely something that needs to be looked at, and probably the only change that really needs to happen to KingPiccolo, and I don't think it would break the deck, but it definitely would hinder it being the top red deck currently in the format. Now to get into some cards, I wanted to go over some of the cards that I do think need to be banned. And Swift Retaliation Cooler is a card that I think needs to be limited to 1 or banned. The main reason is how this card is exploited in a deck like Sin Shinron. And when Xenocell starts coming back into the meta as being the premier SCR, or one of the premier SCRs in the game, the fact that you can play that card for free, and then if you have 3 energy up, you can play this card, is incredibly difficult to deal with. And Sin Shinron does it better than anybody, because Sin plays a lot of its cards out for very, very cheap. Either 1 or 2 energy. And it makes it very easy that on turn 4, turn 5, or even turn 3, you can have 12 cards on board for Xenocell, play out Xenocell, swing with it, and your opponent negates. You play Cooler, combo your whole hand, and you're generally going to win the game. And that's very, very difficult. Very, very difficult to deal with because you can't really do anything about this card. So I think limiting it to 1 or remove or completely just banning it from the game, I think is the right way to go. As someone who plays yellow, obviously that does kind of hurt myself, but I think it is fair for people to, they don't have to deal with this type of card in the game. It's a better battering laser in some senses, because this card also draws you a card and gives you a 5k body, a 5k combo body on board. So you can now combo with that card and the card that you just drew with, giving an extra 10k combo at the minimum in most cases. Now, another card that needs to get banned or limited or errated in some way is going to be Vegeta Final Flash. Again, another yellow card. But the fact that this is the only ICR that gets through, or IAR that gets through barrier, is kind of a problem. If this card couldn't hit through barrier, I think the card would be fine. I think the ability to, remove a card's skills is fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And honestly, yellow has always gotten the bad end of the stick when it comes to extra card effects, because a lot of the times yellow cards effects only trigger on cards that are in rest mode, and that's part of yellow's problem, or it has always been part of yellow's problem. Now, this card being able to be played out for 1 energy in any deck or for free, like in MechaFreeza, and being able to just negate any card skills ignoring barrier is extremely powerful. It stops probably every deck in the game. Whether it's they're going for game, they're trying to double strike, or you're swinging in for something and you can negate the skills of a card, it really, really, really hurts them, and something that needs to be looked at by Bandai in some way. I don't think a limit would really work. I think you either errata the card, saying that it no longer gets through barrier, or you just have to ban the card altogether, and just yellow just doesn't have access to this card. Now, if they do that, yellow definitely becomes probably the weakest color out of all of them, because all the other colors all have an IAR. So Bandai has to be very smart with how they change this card in some way. Because if you ban this card, you're definitely going to ruin a lot of yellow decks not being able to play this card for 1 energy. So we'll kind of see what Bandai decides to come up with. I do think some form of errata will happen to this card, though. And my last card is going to be Demigra, True Power Unleashed. This is the draft box Demigra. This card is way too good for what it does. So, being a 2-drop Overrealm, in most cases a Dark Overrealm, that comes into play and warps the card, draws you a card, and then it warps a card from your opponent's hand every time it attacks, is really powerful. And the biggest thing is with this card is in decks like DarkBroly, where you have the ability to play Ravager for free, you rip a card from your opponent's hand, you can play this card, you can do the same thing. You play it, you draw the card, they warp a battle card, and then you warp a card from their hand. And the next turn, go into another one of these, or into the Gogeta TP, into another Ravager. It puts too much pressure on your opponent. There's not a lot you can do. Obviously, there's decks that have removal, but getting over a 30k body on turn 1 or turn 2, on top of the free plays, is just incredibly ridiculous to deal with. I think this card is going to hit some form of a limit. I also think they could have routed this card and say that this card only has an on-play effect. And I think that would actually limit the effectiveness of this card. So the auto would say When this card is played, choose one. You either warp a card from your opponent's hand and draw a card. You either warp a card from your opponent's hand, or you draw a card and warp a card on board. Or choose one of your opponent's battle cards and warp it on board. I think that would be a little more of a fair way to have this card, because then you play the card, you get an effect, and now you just have a 30k body. And it removes the attacking effect, which being able to warp a card from your opponent's drop area, or from your opponent's hand every single attack, is a little ridiculous. And if this card isn't a once per turn, so if there was a way to restand this card in the future, now we're gonna have an even bigger problem in our hand. So I think it's best just to kind of limit this card to one, completely ban it all together. Just find, you release Gogeta, which is incredibly powerful, and having that card and this card access in the same sort of deck, where you can play this out for a total of 3 energy, or on turn 2, because you can awaken on turn 2 generally with DarkBroly, it gets a little scary. So that's what I have for you guys today. It's a very short list, just some of my own thoughts on what I think should be banned, whether limited or errated, just changed in general. So make sure you guys like and subscribe. Let me know what you guys think of the list. It's a very small list, as I said before, but just some key things that I think are going to get banned. But obviously when they do release the actual ban list, we will go over everything and kind of review that as well. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.